Thank you for listening to this episode of Changes Big and Small. This is Damianne, your host as we explore what makes change exhilarating. Today's chat is with Sue. Sue is a librarian at a school in Tokyo, Japan. She shares some of the leaps that she's taken in her life and the challenge she's now facing. Originally from Australia, Sue first went overseas to Japan on a working holiday visa. After that first trip, she eventually moves back to Japan and spends 20 years living there. When her husband gets the opportunity to work in Chicago, the whole family moves there. After 6 years living in Chicago with a family of 4, Sue's family underwent a dramatic change. She and her husband are back in Tokyo while their daughters are in Chicago and Australia. How do you redefine yourself and put yourself first after years of living life by someone else's rules? Sue shares her journey to help us consider the seasons of life and how we might embark on a new chapter. Let's get started. Please tell us where you were born and where do you live now?
Well, I was born in Australia in a city called Toowoomba. It's Australia's biggest inland city, I believe, but it's pretty small. I live in Tokyo now. I've lived in Japan for 20 years, and then I lived for 6 years in a smallish town outside of Chicago called Arlington Heights.
And what initially brought you to Japan? You've lived there for 20 years, you said. Wow.
Yes, that's right. I was impossibly young at the time, and I just went on a whim. I woke up one day and thought, I don't know that I'm liking my life right at the moment. And I had studied Japanese for a long time without having ever had an application for it. So I just suddenly had the notion to up and move to Japan. So that's what I did.
Imagining to wake up one day and think, I'm just going to move to Japan. That seems like a big decision.
It was 3 weeks to the day when I made that decision, and then I moved to Japan the first time.
How did you prepare for this move?
Well, I went on a working holiday visa for which you have to have a return airplane ticket and a certain amount of money in the bank account. So I got a loan for that exact amount of money, and then I bought the return flight with the money, and I somehow finagled that, and I went for an interview at the consulate, and I guess they thought I was okay. I had to promise to move around every couple of months or so and not to work full time, and definitely not to work in a shady business.
How long did you spend on this first visa moving around Japan?
Well, the visa was for 6 months and you can renew it twice. So I was there for around about 18 months.
And then you went back to Australia after that?
Yes, I did. I went back to Australia, finished my degree, and then moved right back to Japan again.
Okay.
That's when the 20 years really began.
What keeps you busy now?
Well, I just finished my 100th master's degree. That's not true, actually. I've just finished my second master's degree. I'm a librarian now. And my journey to becoming a librarian started probably 8, 9, even 10 years ago when I was studying my first master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages. I studied for that master's degree in the library of Nagoya International School.
Which is where we met, yeah.
That's right. And so I studied for that master's in the library, and the librarian at the time had me subbing for her. And I really, really enjoyed subbing in the library and thought I'd love to be a librarian, but it's such a pipe dream. So I became the ESL teacher of NIS, and then suddenly my husband was transferred to America. So I had to go to America, and I wasn't allowed to work for visa purposes. And so I decided to become a librarian and do all of the things that I wouldn't be able to do if I was working. So I decided to try and fill the hole in my resume with everything that I wanted to do. And it was kind of nice. It was a luxury to be able to study as I wanted to do and attend all of these fabulous conventions. It was kind of a roller coaster ride in some ways because it was hard fitting into a third culture, which a lot of people think that as an Australian living in America would be super easy. I didn't find it to be.
What made it hard?
I guess looking at me, I look like everybody else who lives in Arlington Heights. But as soon as I open my mouth, it's like, oh, your accent is so cute. A lot of fairly conservative people living around. I found it hard to connect sometimes. And I think mainly I'm a person who likes to keep busy and I like to work. So not being permitted to do so was pretty big.
You mentioned before that you had the dream and you thought it was a pipe dream of being a librarian. How did you come back to this dream?
That's an interesting story because when I was still at NAS, I met a lady called Kathy Short. I was kind of a PD nerd.
It's a great thing, the curiosity and the quest for learning, right?
Right. And she's a pretty great lady in the field of inquiry. And she has a website called World of Words, which, I was really into. And so when I went to America, I contacted her again. After I had finished another degree that I was working on, which was a certificate of IB education. After I had finished that degree and everything was winding up, I was like, well, what next? I don't know. So I guess I'll email Kathy Short. She emailed right back and she said, you should meet Junko Yokota. And at first I thought, oh, really? Like, you have to choose a Japanese person that I now have to meet just because I lived in Japan and whatever. What I didn't realize was that she was giving me the greatest gift of my life, meeting the greatest professional mentor that I could have had. Junko was a librarian, a school librarian, and now she's Dr. Junko Yokota, and she's just a very special person in the world of children's books, in particular picture books. She was the director of the Center for Teaching Through Children's Books, which I started volunteering for, and honestly, I just fell in love with everybody there. Everybody from the center is my hero, really. It's just some really brilliant children's librarians there. And from the minute that I got involved in the center, I wanted to be a children's librarian and nothing else. Things started to really get interesting when Junko said to me one day, hey, would you like to help out, be a kind of a gopher or something for the Caldecott Committee? And I thought, yeah, sure, I'll, be a gopher. And surely you don't mean the Caldecott Committee from, the Caldecott Prize. You don't really mean that. Yes, that's what she meant. And so I became the magic food fairy of the Caldecott Committee 2015. I would run back and forth and get the Caldecott Committee their dinners or their lunches or when they were deciding which book was the best of that year. It was such an amazing experience. Obviously, I couldn't go into the meetings and I couldn't know. It's all very secretive and hush-hush. But just attending that conference, the ALA conference, and being around all of that magic just hooked me in. And I haven't missed another ALA conference since that time. Everything kind of snowballed from there. And I really owe a lot to Junko and therefore to Kathy Short, and therefore to NIS.
It's funny how the pieces of life kind of connect together,
right.
But you have to be open to that connection also, because you did have to contact Kathy Short to make those connections. ALA, for those who don't know, is the American Library Association. Other thing that I'm thinking while I listen to you is how your passion, it's something that you're learning, and as well as your curiosity, because some people find something they're interested in, but they still keep some distance. But you jumped right into all of it.
Yeah, Damianne, I'm a jumper. I jump. That's kind of what I do. And I think back to when I first moved to Japan. I was definitely a jumper back then. And I feel like I have lost the ability to jump a little just recently, but I do find that jumping is what works for me, what I like to do best.
Were you always this way? Can you remember the first time you
Jumped.
did this?
That
Yeah.
was probably when I came to Japan. I mean, I wasn't a particularly brave child. I grew up in a fairly conservative town, supportive family. I guess my sister went overseas, so that she was the first to go overseas in our family. But I think that my early experience jumping into Japan, and I think that the jump that I took to Japan that first time was a really good move. And the jump that I took to America was ultimately a good move. The jump that I took into the library world was ultimately a good move. But towards the end of my time in the USA, I think I started to be really anxious and really nervous person. I guess always being busy is good in one way, but you tend to try and make a version of yourself that other people will expect and other people will like. I've always wanted to work, but part of that is always wanting to feel like I'm worthwhile. So when I was not working in America, it was hard for me to feel worthwhile, even when I was volunteering for so many things. I was the band photographer for my kids' band. I was working for the Centre for Teaching Through Children's Books. I was on the notable Children's Recordings Committee for a while, the ALS committee for audiobooks and children's music. And I was doing all of these things, but I think that maybe I was overcompensating for, what I couldn't do. And I guess I was doing all of those things because I wanted to retain some kind of control over my life.
Sounds like you were doing a lot, but somehow you were still
I was
constrained.
still constrained. And when I came back to Tokyo, when I knew that I was coming back to Tokyo, I was looking really hard for a library job. So when one was not forthcoming, I think I became a little bit desperate. At the same time, what happened to my family was 1 minute we were 4 people living in a house together and a loving, tight-knit family. And then the next, it seemed like, one of my children now is in Chicago and one is in Australia, and now we are in Tokyo. People talk about empty nesting syndrome, and I feel like our nest has blown up and then burnt to the ground and then flown off into the wind and is scattered to the 4 winds, which is okay. And, you cannot keep your children forever. That's so true. But that happened at the same time that I was coming back to Tokyo and trying to find a job as a librarian. I think that everything was just a bit too much.
It sounds very stressful, like there is a lot.
And we're now 4 different people in 3 different time zones.
Which adds additional complexity. How has that changed your life? And maybe that's even too broad, but...
I ended up taking a library assistant job. I'm still looking for work as a librarian, but my life changed just because I'm only really doing things for me now. I'm not really doing anything for anybody else. Sometimes I'll make dinner for my husband. Sometimes I've had to concentrate a lot on my own mental health along the way. And I guess the one thing that I've learned is that you cannot control anything. So you have to be ready for everything, because you don't know what kind of scenario is going to come up and you don't know what's going to help you at any given time. So you just have to try different things and keep flexible and keep open to change, because change is the only thing that's constant.
What would you say is the biggest experience that taught you this lesson? Was it one thing or was it a series of smaller things?
It's really been a process. It's hard to explain. I think that in America, when I was trying to be what everybody wanted me to be, trying to be the best mother, trying to be the best friend, or trying to be the best wife, or trying to be the best librarian and trying to be the best this and the best that, I was truly doing my best, but I probably wasn't doing my best for me. I was really pulled in too many different directions. So I think that when I came back to Japan, that was what I was used to. And so I find myself kind of shadowing people and how people are. So I have to stop myself from trying to get pulled into everybody else's drama.
It sounds like you felt untethered after some
Right.
point.
I did. I felt very much untethered. And, I've had to do a lot of work on myself, and I see a therapist now, so that's helpful with that. But I guess that what I've learned in these last couple of weeks even is just that you cannot be an unreal version of yourself. You have to be the most authentic person that you can be. It's not sustainable to be somebody else's version of yourself. You can't keep that up.
I think it's difficult when you're used to acting in a certain
Mm.
way to then find out what that authentic self is. What's your process like?
I think it's a lot of writing. I write letters. I contact friends. You really have to know who to trust with what kind of information. And I've found out the hard way that it can be tricky to know who can handle whatever kind of information. But as far as knowing what my authentic self is, I think I just do it by making mistakes and then realizing that I shouldn't have crossed that line.
It does take some reflection, right?
Yeah, it certainly does. I'm a fairly visual person, coming from my band photography background. I'll be looking through photos on my phone and I'll come to one that gives me pause. So sometimes it's writing, sometimes it's looking at photos that I've taken. Sometimes it's talking things through with my husband or my therapist. There's not one way, but I do know that being somebody else's version of me is not sustainable.
How long since you've been back to Japan?
It's a bit more than a year, so I came back in June.
I think what I sense from you and what I know of you is your inclination to serve and your interest in helping people as well. Where does the pressure come in order to be something else other than maybe who you are?
That's an interesting question. How long is your podcast? I don't know if this even answers the question, but I was born into a step family and I'm the only child of my two parents, and my dad had kids and my mum had kids. And so I found as a child that I would have favorite siblings. And usually my favorite siblings pretty much corresponded with whichever sibling was in trouble at that time. And by in trouble, I mean in trouble with my parents, or, they were doing the wrong thing or whatever. And so I would kind of attach to them because I felt like it was my job to keep them in the family. And I felt like it was my job to keep them happy, or keep my parents happy, or, keep my parents together. Or I don't know if any of this makes sense.
It sounds like there is a long history of you protecting people, serving people,
Right.
caring for people, and that isn't a very easy habit to break out of. Like, it's a lifelong habit. So.
And I really need to let go now because, I have these adult children who not only do they not need my help, but my help would be hurting them. So I feel like I have to change my ways and I have to find out who my true authentic self is and not try and make everyone happy, because the only people that can make them happy is themselves. The only person who can make me happy is myself.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's a big realization. I usually ask what's the biggest change somebody's gone through in their life, but it sounds to me like you're going through that right now.
Yes, honestly, it's true. I told my sister that I was doing this podcast just a couple of hours ago, and I told her the question you were going to ask me about, what's the biggest change and what has it taught you? And she said, holy crap, what are you going to say? Take your pick of any changes in my life at the moment. There's nothing that's the same.
You've done some incredible things. You've reached some goals, things you thought were pipe dreams that you were able to accomplish. Right. And congratulations for that. Even when you might want to change something, or there's something that's not quite working, or you come to a realization that I need to change something, you're not just sitting back and thinking, oh, I should do this. You're actually taking steps. You're working with a therapist. You're searching for something else you might want to do. You're questioning yourself. And those are all very valuable things.
Damianne, did I ever show you my book that I wrote?
No.
So I wrote this book. It's a picture book, and it goes from the front in English and the back goes in Japanese. And then in the middle, it ends in a picture. I feel like this book is probably a metaphor for my life. So would you like me to read it to you?
Yes, please.
So you won't be able to see it on a podcast, but it's got...
we can use a couple of images.
Oh, right, sure. Yeah, you could probably use it for the cover or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I went for a walk and I found a seed. It was a tiny and beautiful seed. I put it in my hand and I carried it home. While I walked, I thought about that seed. I imagined what it might become. If I planted it in just the right place, it could be a lovely pink lady, proud and tall. My flower would reach up taller and taller. The rain would fall and the sun would shine, and it could be a great father tree. Roots digging deep, my tree would become stronger and stronger. If I took extra special care of my gift, it might become a loving mother orchard. Ripe fruit would hang sweet and low. More and more seeds ready to grow. It might just become a vast sea of wildflowers dancing like fairies in the breeze, helping to spread seeds further and further. If I loved my seed with all of my heart, it might become a mighty rainforest. My seed would grow and grow and grow. Other seeds would come from the wind, and they would grow and grow and grow. My whole world would become my rainforest. I sowed my one seed in just the right place. My plant began to grow. And then it's the end of the book, but then there's like a picture in the middle of the book that represents like all of the different things. So I guess when I wrote this book, I was thinking about potential and thinking about different things that you could do in your own life and different ways that you could cultivate yourself. I've never published this book. It's kind of in a weird place between, it's not really a children's book, but then again, it's not really an adult book either.
Maybe it's an everybody book. There's like messages for everybody to get depending on where they are in their own journey and own life.
Right. I had an idea with this book the other day, and I thought if I could make this book without the illustrations and have different children illustrate it, it might show how different children interpret the words that I wrote.
What a great idea.
This kind of thing is sort of typical of ideas that I have that, I think, oh yeah, I just have to do that. And so I jump and see where it goes. And
are you comfortable being this way? Is there something about that discomforts you?
No, that part of me, like, I really enjoy having ideas, and I really like acting on those ideas, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. When I first wrote this book, I was sure that I wanted it to be published. What I didn't know was that I was not ready to publish anything. I didn't know anything about children's books. Little did I know that Junko Yokota was going to be right there in my life history one day, changing my life.
But it seems you've had this love of books for a long time, and sitting in the library and discovering that a librarian could be something that you're interested in was part of that journey, but you were not new to books then.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't new to books, but I guess I was naive about the process of storytelling. I get very enthusiastic about things. So I really just enjoy being in the library and talking enthusiastically with like-minded people. And I think that people who come to libraries are those kind of people that I like to hang out with.
What's your favorite book?
No, I have too many.
That's not really a fair question. Is there a book that you read again and again and again?
Well, I have a book blog.
Oh, okay.
My book blog is purplebookcart.com, and that's got some of my favorite books on it. But the book that tells my story best at the moment is Beagle, The Adventures of Beagle, An Unimaginary Friend. It was the book that won the Caldecott Prize the year that I was the Magic Food Fairy. And I felt very strongly that Dan-Santat, the author-illustrator, had written that book for me. Yeah, it's perhaps true that he didn't, but I felt very strongly at the time that was my story. And it's the story of an imaginary friend who lives in the place where all imaginary friends live until they get imagined by somebody, until somebody gives them a name. And I felt a little like I was living in America in imaginary world until somebody saw the worth in me or something like that. So anyway, the story goes that Beagle does the unimaginable, and he just goes out into the real world even though nobody's invited him. That also feels like me, you know, making the jump and going to Japan all those years ago. But anyway, he goes into the real world, and he notices a bunch of really hard truths about the real world, like grown-ups eat cake and everybody seems tired all the time and they're all sleeping on the train, and they have to have naps. And the color comes back into the book when he starts seeing other imaginary friends like him, but he still can't find his one person. I'm not going to give the ending away because it's just too beautiful and I want you to read the book. Beagle was the beginning of my library journey, and the end of my library journey was, funnily enough, another Dan Santat book, thanks to Dan Santat, by the way, who's coming to Japan next year at my invitation. I know, very exciting. Dan Santat's book, After the Fall, is the beautiful story of how Humpty Dumpty got back up on the wall after he fell off and broke.
I never knew what happened to Humpty Dumpty next.
It has a beautiful ending as well, which I will not spoil by telling you what happens, but it is just the kindest book that I think tells a story about trauma and PTSD and anxiety and fear and resilience in the kindest way, in a way that's completely palatable to children. So when I graduated from my library degree, I had Beagle on my hat, which I think you've seen, on my graduation cap, and then I had these orange earrings, which are an image from After the Fall, orange feathers. So those two books are very special, but there's so many others that, you know, I could go on about.
I think that's one of the powerful things about books, is that we can see ourselves in them. We can connect deeply with them, whether or not there was something specific, even though the author may not have known us.
Thinking that picture books are for children, because they are not. I mean, they are as well, but they are definitely a thing that can be a very powerful motivator in the lives of adults.
I remember when I realized this, because at my last school, International School of Prague, whenever we had assembly in elementary school, one student would read a picture book and the images would show on the screen. And I mean, Dr. Seuss, or however you should say that name, books are fun. I'm sure there are some lessons in there, more than just fun. But there were so many books that I encountered because the children were reading them and sharing the story with us. And yes, there are powerful messages in children's book, and sometimes the children get some things out of it and adults get some things out of it, and sometimes they're aligned and sometimes they're different because we create meaning out of our experience.
What was your favorite book growing up, or what's your favorite children's book now?
I don't know that I have a favorite children's book from when I was growing up. I remember that the books that really made me love reading were books called The Adventures of Mr. Pink Whistle and other books by Enid Blyton. And yes, growing up in St. Lucia, in a small place, we didn't have a library nearby where I could go and check out books. And I remember my grandfather would buy me a book every 2 weeks when he went to town, to the capital. And I always looked forward to those because magic happened in those stories. And that's what I remember.
You can go into another world
of excitement and possibility, curiosity. I know that you haven't been home long from work, so I think it would be good for us to wrap up. I would like to ask if you have any advice for somebody who might be going through your same journey, or somebody who doesn't really feel courageous enough to make a big jump in 3 weeks. What might you say to help them make a change in their lives?
Well, first of all, you don't have to do the jump in 3 weeks. I was really young when I did that. But I think that it's good to move forward with trust and optimism. And what I mean by trust is that trust that everything's going to be okay in the end. However it is that you can be less fearful, I think you should do it. And I mean, like the Humpty Dumpty character, like he had a plan, and little by little he was able to make himself less fearful. The thing that I was thinking about on the train coming home was that you cannot ultimately control anything, but you should be ready for everything. And that the biggest part of that, I think, is kindness to yourself and being kind to yourself at all times. By all means, be kind to all people at all times if you can. The most important person to be kind to is yourself when you're going through, hard times.
Where does your support system come from? What's the role of a support system in this journey for you?
You don't have to lay out every detail of your life for every person, but you do need to trust the people who you're close to, and just have a few select people that you can bounce certain things off, and know who those people are so that you can bounce things off them. I do have a very interesting secret shouting hole.
Oh?
I have a friend who has an old disused email address that she doesn't use anymore. And sometimes when I need to write a hot potato kind of letter, when I need to write something that is definitely not for human consumption, she lets me write to her old email address. And there was a time in America when I was living in America and I was having frustrations with a certain thing. I was like emailing this person and going, nah, nah, nah. And eventually the person started emailing back, and that was really fun. It was really fun. Of course, it was just my friend who was taking the voice.
Right.
Saying, I am sorry, but I am a jerk.
I really like this story because I think it also shows that even when things are hard, you can be playful.
Yes, I love that she did that for me. And I just think it's so important to know who you can trust with things like that.
You said you were thinking about this interview beforehand, and I did give you an idea of what the arc of our conversation could be about. Is there anything that you had on your mind that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to share?
No, actually, I mean, I didn't imagine this interview would start from when I was a younger person, but now that it did, it actually has given me a lot of insight to my current situation. And you pointing out that I have been a bit of a jumper and an enthusiastic sort of leaper into strange situations has really made me feel a little bit less fearful. I can be that person that I was, and I'll still be safe,
Excellent. I did not expect that either. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It has been wonderful having this conversation. Come share your journey with us on social media or in the Changes Big and Small Facebook community. To receive the podcast every week, hit subscribe in your favorite podcast app, or you can subscribe right on the website if you're listening to the episode there. See you next Wednesday. As always, remember that change starts with one small step. Might kindness to yourself be the first step that you can take today? Have a wonderful week.